Okay, let's move on to verse 3. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and the world wondered after the beast. Now, this has been used. I remember when I was a dispensationalist, I saw a movie that I thought was just so powerful. It was so amazing. And now I just am so embarrassed by it. It was called The Omega Code, if anybody has seen The Omega Code. The Omega Code is a Christian movie that tries to talk about kind of like a Left Behind sort of theme. And one of the world leaders is shot in the head, and everybody sees him die. And then he is then possessed by Satan and comes back to life. And everybody's like, wow. And they see him as like a Jesus type figure who has power over death. And that is all based on this one verse, that there's going to be a future. I just want folks to see how we're doing this study, how we're going back and letting the Bible interpret itself in the days of these kings, things which must shortly take place, the times that Jesus was alive in the first century. And then I want people to see in verse 3, here's what it actually says. Now, all the teaching you've ever heard your whole life on a future singular leader, let's call him the Antichrist. Even though that word isn't mentioned anywhere for a singular future leader, let's call him the Antichrist. That'll be good. And then if anybody asks us why that's not Revelation, we'll say, well, it's the beast of Revelation. Same person. Let's just combine those ideas. Let's make it the same person because, why not? That helps our thing here. And in verse 3, clearly he dies with probably a gunshot wound, and then he's resurrected. That sounds good. Jimmy, none of that's accurate. And actually, let's read it very slowly and look at what it says. See if somebody can catch this. And I saw one of his heads. That's the heads of the beast. We know there's 7 of them. We're looking at one of them. I'm looking at one of his heads as it were wounded to death. As it were.
Aha.
What is as it were? As it were is a simile.
It's like. It's not.
It's
as if.
It's as if.
It's not literal.
He didn't die. It's not a head wound on any of them. It's as if it was one, but it wasn't one. Now look at this. It's as if it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Wow, I thought this was the end of it, but it's not. It's as if it were wounded unto death. Okay, so even in the one text, the one verse that people use to create a future Antichrist with a gunshot wound to the head that clearly dies and is resurrected, and everybody's amazed. This is where everybody's getting that from, and it's not even what it says. And so, talk about flimsy. It's totally made up. Now, if you didn't go slow like we are, somebody could show you that verse, and you could go, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess I don't know enough to refute you. Yeah, it sounds like somebody's, I guess, shot in the head or whatever and comes back to life."
Yeah,
but that's not what it says.
Well, this Antichrist is also a guy walking around with 7 heads, right?
Yeah.
Or 10,
that's the point.
It was.
That's the point. You just nailed it. And that goes back to the very first video you and I ever made, which is why I'm so passionate about the art of interpretation, the rules of interpretation. You have to be consistent when you're interpreting. If you're going to take this to be a future Antichrist, which is not in the text anywhere, dies with a gunshot wound to the head and is resurrected, which is not found in the text anywhere, you nailed it. You're making this setting in time and space a real person that goes through these things, and you're ignoring then you're choosing what's literal and what's metaphorical, what's illustration, what's vision, and what's future historical narrative. And they're mixing all of these genres, and they're mixing interpretive rules. You're exactly right. If this is a future literal person, he should have 7 heads. But they will never agree to that, right?
Yeah.
Here's what's really going on. When John looks over at this sea monster, this sea beast out of the abyss, which means it's Rome, mixing all of our metaphors, it's Rome being controlled by the power of the abyss or given over to Satan. That's all we're talking about there. The dragon gives it its power. That there appears for a time that it starts to die, but it doesn't. And I think what we're talking about here is the civil war in AD 69, the year of the 4 emperors. It looked like the Roman Empire was going under, and then it got its act together in 70. And we're talking about the destruction of the temple in 70. So there was another resurgence. So I think that's what this is talking about here. And also, there's another reason that we have here. And let me just pan back for a second and just show this. Where else in the Bible do I say this all the time if you hear me teach, This is the whole point of the whole Bible. This is the plot of the Bible. What is the plot of the Bible found in Genesis 3:15, where we see a beast that's going to get a head wound, right? It's that famous passage in Genesis 3:15. It's the plot line of the whole Bible that the Lord is speaking to Satan. He says that there's going to be a division. We're going to make a division here. The division will be between the people who follow you and the people that follow me. And the one that comes from that woman right there, which is ultimately the woman we see in Revelation 12, the in covenant women that becomes the bride of Christ, which is all of us covenantally, that one's going to give birth to something that's going to crush your head. So we should be thinking in terms, when John is writing this, we should be thinking in terms of a beast with a head-like wound. This one isn't quite it, but man, it kind of feels like it. So when Rome is going through a civil war, when they're going through internal fighting, and it seems like their kingdom is destroyed, it seems like it, but then it's going to kind of get its strength back together and finish the campaign in Jerusalem. And it's going to be in that campaign in Jerusalem when the temple is destroyed and God has Satan do his dirty work and just decimate the old covenant. That is when actually Satan's head will be crushed. His head was crushed in one sense at the cross. Judicially, he's been done since the resurrection. Judicially, he's been done since the death of Jesus. The resurrection is just a whole other level of the new covenant. Satan's been crushed since then, technically, but now civilly speaking, it's going to be very made public when the temple is destroyed. In Romans chapter 16, Paul says that shortly Satan will be crushed under your feet. A reference again back to Genesis 3:15. So he says shortly in Romans chapter 16. Here's another thought too. If you would, Jimmy, could you turn to Philippians chapter 4 and verse 22? Philippians 4:22.
All the saints salute you, chiefly they that are of Caesar's household.
This is absolutely remarkable. Paul is saying in his letter to the Philippians, remember he's writing from jail, and he's saying in his letter to the Philippian church, the church at Philippi, he's saying, hey, please say hi to all these people for me. There's a listing. And then he says all the people that are saying hi back to them. In verse 22, we learn, can you believe this? That people of Caesar's family are getting saved and are a part of the church. And Paul is passing on a greeting from Caesar's family members to the church at Philippi. It was already happening. Wow. Even before AD 70, it was already happening. Satan's head was being crushed by the gospel. Listen, Rome, you could go on, some kind of history channel thing on YouTube, and you can listen to them talk all day long about why the Roman Empire fell. It's one of the biggest enigmas in history that we have. How did the Roman Empire fall? How could something as strong as Rome fall? I can tell you how it fell. It's very simple. It fell because of Christianity. The Christians took over Rome, and Rome's identity was so disgusting. Nero was so depraved. We've talked about this a lot before, but read Josephus on Nero. Nero would skin people alive just to hear them scream. He would skin children and wear their coats in front of their moms. Horrific pit of hell stuff. He would light people on fire to light paths of people walking at night. The Christians, he would do that too. Nero was a sick person and a total pervert, and he was as bad as they come. He was a very beast-like creature. And here we see that Rome was experiencing, those that were in Caesar's household were starting to get saved. And so we can see that even in Philippians chapter 4. So it was already happening. That's why Rome fell. Their identity with Satan fell. And by the time Constantine got there, he probably, for political reasons, had to start making some concessions. That these Christians need to have these concessions because they're our majority population here. Yeah. So anyway, a different topic, but we can get that another time.
But that is what history tells us, that the Christian population was growing so big that Constantine knew that he had to somehow incorporate them into his world, or it was going to be over.
That's exactly right, and that is why we need to be aware of what the Roman Catholic Church is. The Roman Catholic Church was a great compromise, and we can talk about that historically another time, where they took pagan practices and tried to satisfy both sides by adding some things of Jesus and some things of the pagan practices. And out of that birth and that big stirring pot came out the Roman Catholic Church. And we can talk about that another time. Verse number 4 goes on to say this: and they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Now, the they here is very important. The they here is, let me go back. Because I didn't touch on this. In verse number, where do I want to see this at? Is the people that are in all the world. Is that in 2? Oh, okay, 3. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world, that's actually that word. If people want to do a study on that word world, that's not the same word like for God so loved the world. That's for God so loved the cosmos. Cosmos in Greek, but we would say cosmos. This is not all the people of the cosmos. This is actually the word land. And so we talk about earth, world, land. It depends on what Greek word is used. This is all the people in the land. And I'll just say this to save time because we'll develop this later in the chapter. This is talking about the land of Israel. And so the land reference here, remember, we're talking about land versus sea. Land here, we're going to see this with our behemoth in this chapter, the land beast. We have one more beast to go, and it's going to be apostate Israel. But the land here is Israel. So it literally is saying in verse number 3 that all of the land of Israel marveled. Now, this is not speaking about those that are the woman. The woman here, and that is that you're starting to see the wisdom of now the covenantal woman, the church, the bride of Christ, is now pictured as in heaven at this point. It's separating the two groups. So you can see one of these is pictured positionally in Christ, although they're living on the land. We're going to take them in a category and put them in Christ. So now the ones that are pictured as on the land are out of covenant, although in reality there was a smattering and people were living next to each other on the actual land. But for the sake of the imagery, the ones in covenant are in heaven positionally in Christ. Then we have people that are on the land here. So when it says all the world wondered, it's all the land of Israel, all the ones that were out of covenant wondered. And so that's the they of verse 4. That's why I had to go through the hoops there. And they worshipped the dragon. Now, who's the dragon? That's straight up satanic worship. They straight up worshiping Satan at this point, because they knew it was Satan that was giving power to Rome. Remember all these stories in the Bible, in the ministry of Christ, where they would go and appeal to Rome about killing Jesus? They knew they would have no chance of killing Jesus with their own laws. And so their loophole they thought was so brilliant was they thought, if he's the king, if he's saying he's the king, then all we have to do is know that he broke the law, that Caesar is king. So if we tell the Romans that this one from Nazareth thinks he's the king of the world, well, he can't even be king of the Jews. It's maybe a death penalty for him. So they were trying to use leverage. So you always see the Pharisees trying to be in the presence of the Roman officials and tell on Jesus. In other words, they were really riding the authority of Rome. And later we're going to find that the harlot rides the beast until the beast bucks off the harlot and devours her. That's the story of Revelation. That's the story of what we're getting at, is the harlot, the ones out of covenant, that's why the 144,000 are referred to as virgins. They're not virgins physically on the earth in their lives. It doesn't mean they're not married. But this has the idea that they're a pure bride before Christ. They've not taken part in spiritual adultery. They are in covenant with God. They're virgins in the sense that they are true to their husband. They are not defiled with sexual, in this case, spiritual impurities. They're pure before God, as opposed to the great harlot. I mean, throughout the whole Bible, we've heard Israel be called the harlot, the whore, the harlot, all throughout. In fact, there's parts of the prophets that I can't remember which prophet right now. I think it might have been Isaiah, that he looked up and down the road and he said, let's look as far as we can down this way down the road. Let's look as far as we can down this way down the road. And he just basically says, is there anybody you guys haven't slept with? And he's talking spiritually. They're going after this God and after that God. He says, let's go to the highways and hedges and try to find someone you haven't slept with. And then this is actually in the text. We'll have to find this. He actually says, and you're not even a good prostitute. A normal prostitute at least gets paid. You get used and abused and left with no payment. You guys are stupid. That's what he's saying to them. That's how much Israel is said to be the whore or the harlot. So that's what we have. The harlot in Revelation, we're going to see this in our passages, riding on the beast. So that's the harlot is using the beast or riding the beast to kill Jesus, and they think it's working until one thing happens. The beast is then going to buck them off and destroy them. That's the story. Rome is going to destroy apostate Israel after apostate Israel used them to kill Jesus. And they worshiped the dragon, verse 4, which gave power onto the beast. And then they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Now, just a couple more passages, and we'll call it for this right here. I want to read you a quote by Milton Terry, and actually Milton Terry is going to be quoting Josephus here, but I want to give him credit. He says this: according to Josephus, the honors which were demanded by the Caesars included, among other things, that all subjects of the empire in all the provinces should build altars and temples to him, treat him as they would treat other gods, and even swear by his name. And that's in Antiquities 18:1. Let's go ahead and let's conclude this by going to John chapter 19 and verses 12 through 15. John 19, 12 through 15.
And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, if thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said unto the Jews, behold your king. And they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar.
Oof. Woo. Bad choice, guys. We have no king but Caesar. You know, and what shall we do with this one? Crucify him. Let's go to a parallel passage in Matthew chapter 27 and verses 24 and 25. Matthew 27, 24 and 25.
When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children.
Oh, just gives me shivers. Why would they? That's how much they hated Jesus. Why would they double down and say, and on our children? Remember the time where Jesus is, I can't remember the passage off the top of my head, but we've gone over this before. When Jesus is on the way, he's trying to carry the cross, and one of the women were weeping for him because he looked so terrible. And he looked in that moment and he said, don't cry for me. He said, cry for yourselves and for your children.
That's in the Luke version, I think.
That's in Luke.
The crucifixion.
Man, that just, in that moment, in all the agony Christ was in, can almost imagine him just shaking, saying, cry for yourself, not for me, and for your children. That further illustrates, Jimmy, the dating of the book of Revelation. Why would he say that to somebody? Cry for yourselves and for your children. Why would they cry for their children? Because in that generation, the temple would be destroyed, and this is what we're talking about in Revelation in the Great Tribulation. The dating of Revelation. Yes, you can go to that video of ours and you can watch it and learn about some of the bullet points of why we think that. But really, for those of you who are hanging with us in this study and watching it every video, you see now the greatest dating of Revelation is just to understand what Revelation is about, just to read it. Read it according to Daniel. In the days of these kings, I mean, it's just the whole thing is about the first century and Rome's destruction on the apostate Israelites and the Roman Jewish war of the first century, and then ultimately the Christians then taking over the Roman Empire. But we'll put a pin in it. We'll start in verse 5 in our next video.
If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.